stream. My name is Kat Huang. I am a teaching artist here at Art Prof, and I'm joined today by fellow teaching artist Lauryn Welch and Professor Lieu. Today, we are talking about how to take reference photos. If you want to nerd out about art, Art Prof has everything you need, from tutorials to critiques to a community of fellow art nerds. So, Lauryn, I'm curious what you have to say about why we should bother shooting our own reference photos. Why do you think?
Having reference photos gives you the tools to put together what you want to in your own art pieces. It's like a diary for me. When I'm walking down the street, I see something that's very visually appealing that I think, oh, this could be a great piece someday. So take a picture of it, save it for later, come back to it later. What about you?
Well, for me, whenever I'm looking for something to draw from, I'm usually looking for something very specific, and Google Images just doesn't cut it a lot of the times. Like very recently, I really wanted to see somebody wearing glasses looking up. And it's really hard to find that very specific image on Google Images. So what I would end up doing is just wear a pair of glasses, take a photo of myself. And it's a really simple step to take to really elevate your artwork. Clara, why do you think we should bother shooting our own reference photos?
Well, I think a lot of people look at Google Images because it's the most obvious place to get photos. And they think, oh, there's millions of photos on here. I'm going to have so much to choose from. But actually, a lot of the photos that you see online are problematic. For one thing, sometimes the resolution is really low, so you don't get a lot of detail. Second of all, there is somewhat of a monotony to the way people are shown online. People tend to be very polished and idealized, especially on Pinterest. And so I just find you don't get the genuine quality of a real person that maybe you're actually looking for. And then another thing I would also say is that you just don't get the quantity of photos that you maybe need. I work with many, many photos. Like Kat, for example, how many photos do you usually shoot if you're doing a photo session?
Hundreds. I mean, I think it's good to have more and then cut it down than it is to have too few and desire more.
That reminds me right here, I'm seeing this comment from Neil who says, I have to remind myself that my brain isn't as cool as I think it is. I have to stop pulling everything from my imagination and start shooting my own photos. You know, probably both of you have been in that situation where you have shot too few photos, you shoot maybe one or two, and then you're knee deep or waist deep into the artwork you're making. And oh no, how are you going to make it up? How are you going to make it good as the reference photos you already have? So I'm looking at these graveyard pieces, and what are these from that we have here? Like what is this scene?
Well, so this is from our gouache tutorial. So Alex Rowe wanted to paint a scene of Sleepy Hollow in a colonial town with spooky gravestones and stuff like that. And so he and I actually went to a graveyard just to take photos and get ideas for how he wanted to set up the landscape. And it was great. I mean, we had probably 500 photos to mine from. And so it was just this incredibly rich resource to work with. And Kat, I would also say that another thing that's really hard to get online is different points of view. Why do you think the point of view is so important when you're taking your own reference photos?
Well, when you take your own reference photos, you can really control any point of view possible. And when you're looking online, like if you Google image glasses, you're going to get straight on view of glasses all the time. And not only is that not helpful, but it could also just like box you in to creating just that one point of view. And it's also just a point of view you see all the time on Google. Why would you want to draw that kind of thing? So like I said earlier, I wanted to draw a pair of glasses on someone who was looking up. So the simplest way I can do that is just take my own photo of a different point of view. And not only just glasses looking up, but also looking up to the right, to the left, a little bit lower. Like you can really control when you have your own reference photo shoot.
Ooh, Slepnir also brings up a cool thing. You can draw from life and have trouble figuring stuff out. A photo can clarify stuff. Like, Clara, have you ever had that problem when you're trying to do perspective and your eye just doesn't understand how to draw something when you're doing it from life?
Well, I just feel like the photo is somewhat of a backup. So let's say, for example, the model moves to Montana and all of a sudden I can't paint from life anymore. Then I have a backup because sometimes you don't know, like maybe your still life falls apart, maybe a plate breaks or something. I just think that it's so easy with smartphones and digital photography to take these photos. It's like, why would you not do that? So Kat, in this tutorial, which is the digital illustration tutorial, we actually did hire a model who came and did all these different actions for us. This was not something we did in 2 minutes. We really took time. Why did you spend so much time doing that? Because a lot of people just want to get to the drawing.
Right. Well, two reasons. One is that I really wanted to build a library of helpful different points of view and different resources. And second of all, I don't usually plan like minutely everything I'm going to take photos of. Sometimes I get inspiration from the photos I take. So the more I take, the more chances there are that I could like see something new or see a different point of view of the subject I'm drawing and then change the drawing accordingly. I mean, if you're looking at this tutorial, if you're watching it, you'll see that after I take the photos, I go back into my sketch and change some things to actually include some of the new things I learned from these photos.
So actually, sometimes the reference photo shoot provides inspiration for you.
How do either of you account for the way a camera does not act as an eye does? Whitney asks, how do you deal with the way the camera fisheyes the image or skews the image?
Well, I mean, I think it's inevitable that the camera is going to skew the image in some way or form, which is why I try to take as many as possible to truly understand my subject from different points of view, because it's not possible for the camera to like warp it the same way when I have different points of view of a subject. But Clara, what are your thoughts about this problem?
I mean, when I take a reference photo, I'm not really that dedicated to it. I use a couple things, but I'm not really trying to get an accurate representation. Like, look at this image here. Okay, we have Alex Rose gouache painting on the left-hand side. We have the actual church that he looked at on the right-hand side. And sure, you guys can totally see how the painting was done from the photo, but you guys see how Alex changed the lighting situation? He changed some of the colors. And so to me, the reference is there, but it's like a loose guide. I don't really feel that I have to be so faithful to that image. And so, yeah, if something's a little wonky in the photo, I don't care. I just change it in the final piece. And so that's another thing about reference photos is I think people have trouble with them sometimes because you feel almost an obligation to copy the photo. Have you ever seen that, Lauryn, in your own work or other people's work?
Oh yeah, that is an issue across all levels of artists, except for maybe artists that are working super spontaneously and never use photos at all. But I think anytime you're engaging with a photo, there is that temptation to get really stiff and to get really attached to that photo. I am constantly dealing with that in my own work and trying to figure out ways to blunt that, to make that not as prevalent. And one of the things that I found super helpful is to either make a sketch from life first or make a sketch from the photo and then work from that sketch primarily rather than the photo itself. Do either of you have tips? Kat, do you have tips on getting away from that stiffness of photography?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a crutch when you have a photo and you're like, the image is right there. I could just copy it. But it's really taking that leap of faith and going like, I can do better than this and I will do better than this. And I will come up with something on my own. And one thing that really helps me is, again, different points of view of a subject, because in that way I find different ways that this subject inspires me. And usually when I take a reference photo, it's not for just the one image. There's usually a larger narrative I'm trying to tell in my image. So it's sort of a combination of different kinds of things. And that already encourages me to break away from being boxed into one reference photo.
Yeah, I actually tell a lot of people, don't use one photo. Use many, so that you're almost making a collage of reference photos that you then blend together and then turn to something else. Because what I see a lot is people taking one reference photo and then literally just copying the exact same composition. And when you do that, there's not a lot of creativity there, because this reference photo on the left has the figure in the middle, but in the end, I ended up putting the figure in the upper left-hand corner. So making compositional changes that are fundamental really helps.
Yeah, that Tom G says, I remember to use cameras with film. Photos were a lot more difficult to take and develop as compared to digital photography today. It's pretty amazing that you can take endless photos and have instant access. I think it's such a privilege to be able to work with so many photos, but I can also see how that could be overwhelming for someone. So, Clara, how do you deal with all of these photos once you have them? How do you pick and choose?
Well, sometimes what I do is I'll go in and I'll manipulate them in Photoshop. So this photo you see on the left, it was originally a color photo. But because I knew I was doing drawings in ink wash, which was black and white, I thought, you know what, I'm just going to turn these black and white in Photoshop. And what I would also do is I would really mess with the contrast. So that way, eventually, it wasn't really the same photo. And in fact, sometimes I'll blur the images because all that detail I find to be very distracting. So it doesn't even end with just snapping the photo. Sometimes there's manipulation in between as well. Do you ever do that, Kat?
Oh, absolutely. In the digital painting tutorial, you can see me doing it live, where I'm photoshopping a man's face onto the body of a caterpillar in order to get that perfect reference photo. But yeah, I agree with the comment in that there might be a lot of photos and you can get overwhelmed. But I don't know. I feel like I've never had that problem myself. I'm wondering if you've ever had that problem, Clara or Lauryn. But for me, whenever there's more stuff, it's just so much more. It's a ripe breeding ground for the perfect image later on.
Well,
Let's go ahead.
Oh, I think I take pictures of magical patterns and magical objects, and sometimes I feel overwhelmed by my hoard of wonderful things. There can be too much of a good thing, and there can be a paralysis in choosing which magical things I want to put together, which textures and things. So I try to make sure that other parts of my image are really controlled for. Do I have the exact color palette that I know I want to use? Do I have a certain content or subject matter that I know that I want to use? And that can help dictate which things I'm going to choose for my pile.
Let's talk about how to actually set up to take a photo, because it's actually surprisingly hard to take a good reference photo, because there are certain things that don't matter. And you can have a reference photo that looks sort of crappy, but maybe it has the exact visual information you need. But other times it's just a crappy photo that is not going to work for you. So one thing that I find very helpful is being very deliberate about the lighting situation. So for example, this was a model that I hired to help me with my falling series. And I was really specific about the direction of the light, the quality of the lighting. Kat, why do you think that matters in a reference photo?
Well, a really big thing we always harp on people's images on our prof is lighting, light and shadow, because that's a really big part of a visual thing. And when you have a good reference of light and shadow, that already informs your image on another level. But if you don't have a good light and shadow reference, then it's really hard to make up that thing on your own because you really do need that information through your photos.
Yeah.
Lauryn, do you ever light your reference photos?
Since my reference photos are mostly unplanned, usually no, and this is evident in my work, which never has a clear lighting situation, but that's just evidence that I should think about those things, and people should think about those things when they're shooting their reference photos, because what happens is your artwork, if you're compiling from multiple reference photos and they have different lightings, ends up having this Photoshop effect where a bad Photoshop effect where you've just got things placed next to each other and they're not really connecting and it looks totally unreal. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it also depends on your priority. I mean, for me, I work in black and white, and so pattern and color doesn't matter to me. I mean, your work is so much about pattern and color. So a lot of it has to do with your artistic focus. So another thing I see people doing is they oftentimes shoot the part of the subject that they really want to draw way too small. So for example, let's say you want to do a drawing of an eye. Oftentimes what I see is people will take a full figure photo, and then the portion of the photo that's an eye is like tiny and the resolution is really bad. So Kat, why does it matter to get really close in and take a close-up photo of that eye?
Because then you can see the eye. If you go way out, all you're gonna see is some like vague white, black, blue colors that are very blobby. But when you zoom in, you can really see the details such as like the eyelashes, the veins, the texture of the skin versus the eyeball. I mean, stuff like that is so minute, and it's really hard to render that kind of thing. So if you have a reference photo that really helps you visualize it, that really takes your image onto another level.
This is a quick question from W315Bird. Do you delete your reference photos when you're done with your project? And if not, how do you find them again? We're taking all these reference photos. What do you do with them, Clara?
Well, this particular case, I was working with one model, and I think I shot over 5,000 photos of her over the course of 4 years, which is obscene. Wow. And a large portion of them were nude photos. And so I deleted them because I just didn't want them to be around. I mean, she and I definitely had a professional understanding about where the photos wouldn't go. I mean, I'm showing you images of her eye, which doesn't really matter, but I had full out nudes. And so in that case, I got rid of them. Everything else I just keep. I have a Flickr page that still has all of those photos there. And I was mining some of the photos for the slideshow from that Flickr page. So sometimes it's nice to have it online where it's nice and organized.
Got another very quick question. I think this is mainly for Clara. I don't know if I missed this, but what cameras and lights do you recommend or need for shooting good reference photos?
I mean, it really depends on the quality you want, because these images I have here, this is like studio lights, really bright, really dramatic. But Kat, what if you want something that looks really soft and subtle? What would you use instead?
Well, I would block the light with a cloth or something like that. I would really try to manipulate the light to be something that I want it to be. Another thing I actually do is wait for a certain time of day, because you really cannot manipulate natural light filtering through a window. That's something you really have to catch in the moment. So sometimes I wait till the afternoon, or maybe I wait till dusk or something like that, because those light qualities are so different. And sometimes you do have to plan ahead, but it's really not that much work. It is an extra step. It's bothersome, but it'll pay off in the end.
I'm curious, you guys who are watching right now, how many of you regularly take your own reference photos, and how many of you do not? We will not judge you. We just want to know, just in general, who takes their own photos and who does not, because it is an interesting skill that I think is very, very useful. So let's talk about this. What about when you just do a photo shoot and you don't have a plan? Have you ever done that, Lauryn, where you didn't have an image in mind, you just took a bunch of photos and did something?
As I have said, that is my entire life. I never have an image in mind way in advance. Mostly, I've taken some photos that I really like, and I look at them and I think, wow, this place means something to me, or this collaboration between these patterns right now in these forms is super cool. I want to do something with that. And so I take a ton of random photos, a ton of spontaneous photos. There are photos of my cats that I've used. There are photos of my roommate Mark sitting on a model stand being very silly that I've used. There are photos from RISD Artist Ball that I've used. Just everything for my life is available, I feel like. What about you, Kat?
Yeah, I actually have reference photos in my computer that are just inspiration, like photos I've taken, or maybe even photos I see on the internet. I know shooting your own reference photo is really the best way to get your references, but sometimes you see something online and you're like, it's perfect. Yeah, why not? But on that note, another thing you avoid when you shoot your own reference photo is copyright violation. So you got to be really careful about how you use your references and where you get them from. But yeah, I do shoot a lot of spontaneous photos. And later on, you'll see that I use a spontaneous sunset photo for another image. And I didn't mean for that to be a reference photo. I just took it because it was pretty, but I ended up using it in the end. What about you, Clara? Your spontaneous photo shoots, can you tell us about it?
That's pretty much the only way I do it. I mean, Kat, you're a lot more calculated than I am, because we'll see some images of illustrations you've done later where you had a really specific pose that you definitely wanted to get. I just go to the model and say, do some stuff and I'll take some pictures and we'll see what happens. I really don't plan it in advance. So I'm very reliant on the photo shoot to give me the images that I want to work with. And that's what we did with the model here. Was we were not planning on him washing the flowers, but we thought, hey, he's there, let's have him wash flowers. That's sort of fun. And we did end up using some of those images, which I think is really cool. Now, Lauryn, what about this concept of using multiple photos instead of just mining from one for a piece?
100%. I'm all for it. I think that's one of those tips and tricks that you can use to actually get away from being too reliant on photos, which is a little paradoxical, but if you think about it, you're not relying on the composition and exact qualities of a single photo, and it really takes a lot of skill in your brain, spatial strategy, trying to put photos together into a new image. We're looking at this picture here of the model and the caterpillar and how those blend together. And isn't that wild, guys? Isn't that so nuts? I am totally thrilled by this incredible magic. Kat, how did you do this?
Thanks, Lauryn. I'm glad you like it. Well, yeah, I mean, the way I did it was I just had a lot of material. We took so many reference photos. Also, Google Images is available because we don't have caterpillars on hand all the time. And I'm like, how can I reimagine this in like a cool new way? And since I had all the materials, I could just do it. Additionally, you can also see in the tutorial video, I do actually Photoshop some caterpillars together. Like, I kind of feel like Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster, putting all these things together and like making a new creature come to life.
You've made an abomination.
I like this comment from George, who's saying, I draw in a very cartoony style. I take inspiration from poses I see on Pinterest. Then I take photos of myself when the need arises. Because what I have seen sometimes is people will say, well, I want to do cartoons or character design. My designs are so exaggerated. They don't look like real people. I don't need references. And I actually disagree with that. And so that's why I brought up George's comment, because I like that you're doing that despite the fact that you're making cartoons. So Kat, I know you do lots of comics and stuff, and you do so many references, but a lot of your figures are caterpillar people. And why does it matter for characters that are so different than reality?
Because I do want them to be believable. And when something is believable, in the end, it is somehow rooted in reality. So even though I do comics and stuff, like if I draw a cartoon girl jumping, which we saw earlier in the stream, a photo of, I need to get a realistic gesture. I need to get a realistic silhouette of somebody jumping, even though she's going to be cartoonified. And I think that's good if you want to have images that are really informed and images that people believe. Lauryn,
Lauryn, tell us about this piece that we're looking at. This is obviously not a painting of you, and yet you used yourself as the reference. Why did you decide to do that?
So this is a painting of my partner, and he sometimes is not in a position where he can easily get up and pose for things for me. It's really on a case-by-case basis. So I really wanted to do this painting right away. So I just did the pose myself and used that because I knew exactly what I wanted. Neil had a comment earlier. I can't get back to it. It's pretty far up, but Neil, they asked how do you shoot photos when you don't have people available? And if you've got a camera phone, I would just use that self timer. That's all you need. Prop it up against the window. That's exactly how I took this photo, and keep taking photos until you get an amalgamation of the pose that you want. I do that all the time.
I actually have a tip on this. I take a lot of videos of myself as reference. So again, earlier I did a drawing of a girl jumping off some ledge. And the way I did it was I just set up my phone, I put a video on, and I just like climbed on my bed and kept jumping off, jumping until I got the right jump. And here it is. But other times I'm just like, I need somebody who's washing dishes. And so by making a video of myself washing dishes, I can just pause the video at any pose I want. And once you have a video, you essentially have like hundreds of reference photos. So that's my tip for that.
Thank you, Tom G, for the super chat. We really appreciate it, and glad to hear that you guys are getting something out of this stream tonight. I personally find it super useful. I think all of this is really fun.
I want to say another thing about taking a video as opposed to a still photograph, because I have had times where I've done a demo with my class, and I think there was one time my student wanted to do an illustration of somebody strangling another person, and they were trying to pose it. It did not look right. It looked like a mannequin person. And so oftentimes, if you want to get somebody who's leaping, you can't do that by posing a still leap. And so the videos are actually enormously helpful, I find, in a lot of these situations. Now, Lauryn, I want to ask about these photo references, because you have a shelf over here on the right-hand side. And I have to admit, if I didn't really look hard, I don't know that I could tell that this reference photo is even in the painting. And so is that something that is hard for you, or are you trying to mess with us, or what?
Oh yeah, I'm always trying to pull it as far away from the original reference photo as possible, especially because I do rely so heavily on photos for compositions and things like that. This image actually has another reference photo that's a lot closer to what it is overall. It's just not shown here. If you scroll back very far on my Instagram, you might be able to find it. I did look at this at the shelf, though, for those details, the things with the jugs and the bells especially. I just ripped exactly from that photo there and put them in the painting. And you can tell that this is a case where I wasn't paying attention to lighting at all, because those bells are got to have a specific lighting that's not really related to the rest of the piece. So they kind of look stuck on there.
Well, and I also think that ultimately, if you put the reference photo next to the painting, my hope as an artist for my own work is that the artwork looks better than the reference photo. Because I definitely have had students bring in reference photos and the final drawing, and the drawing is not as good as the photo. So how do you deal with that, Kat?
Well, I tend to blend a lot of images together to create my final image, so that it's not really going to be better than one or the other. It's just like so different from the reference images, and I just get like some essence from each image. But I would really plan ahead in that case because you have the reference photos and you have the ability to do thumbnail sketches and pre-planned drawings beforehand. And so seeing how you can make an image that is better than your reference photo really boils down to how you plan making that image. So if you do thumbnails and you create a drawing that you think is more exciting than the photo, then I think you're headed somewhere, and then you can just do your final piece.
Yeah, to address Kate's point, yes, all the time. We always compile thumbnails from all of our resources. That's super important to putting together the final piece without it looking totally wacky and pasted together.
I have to say, though, Kat has an extraordinary system for organizing your reference photos. And if you guys want to see it, watch the Caterpillar tutorial, because Kat walks you through every single step of it. And it really is remarkable because there is really an organization to the way that you decide to do that.
There are a lot of Caterpillar comments right now. I want to draw attention to this awesome chat. Angelic Enigma wants that caterpillar to pose.
Kat, who posed for this violin photo?
So that's my brother. He's a musician, and I needed a very specific pose with a violin, and I didn't have one on hand. And this is actually a case that it's a rare case for me. I didn't take this photo because he was in Chicago and I was in Providence. We were many, many miles apart. So I actually asked him to take many photos of himself with the violin, and then he sent them back to me for feedback. And I'm like, can you please raise your right hand more? Can you please wear a long sleeve shirt so I can see the folds in the clothes? And he sends this image back and he's like, I would never play violin like this. And I'm like, I don't care. This is going straight into my drawing.
I also think it's worth looking at what makes it into the final artwork and what does not, because you're wearing a striped tank top here. And yet the person in the photo is wearing a red tank top. They also have blonde hair. You have dark hair. And so when do you decide, I really should get a red tank top, or I should dye my hair blonde for the, like, how do you know what to really change and what's not worth it? Kat?
Well, for me, it's just a case of, is my ability enough that I can render this from my imagination with no problem? In this case, the drawings are very flat. There's not really much light or shadow to speak of because they're just flat colors. And her hair is also quite cartoony, so I didn't really need to see like the fine details of strands in her face or anything like that. So I thought, yeah, I think I can make that up on my own. But I do want to say that for the reference photo, I did bother to change into a tank top rather than have a long sleeve shirt. So there are things you can control and there are things you can't control. And you got to reconcile with that and try to work around that sometimes.
Kat, quick question for you from Linda. For your videos, is there some way that you turn them into stills?
So you can just pause a video if you want to see a still image, or you can just screenshot different parts of the video as well. If you want to take that extra step, you can also do quick sketches of different parts of the video, but really screenshotting the video would be the best bet for, it's what I usually do at least.
You just pause it where you need it.
Yep.
Cool.
And so, Kat, this is the first one we've seen where you've actually cut somebody out of the reference photo and I think it's the same person, isn't it?
Yeah, they're both my brother.
Okay, so why did you bother to do that, whereas in this one you didn't? Why did you need to do that for this one?
Because this was one scene altogether. I really needed to see how those bodies interacted with each other. Unfortunately, I only had one model, my brother, so I would just take different photos of him and Photoshop them together.
Oh, another question kind of related to this. Victor is asking, I'm a student and I will capture still from a movie for reference of a moving figure, or for framing a composition. How much can I use and not use as a reference? What's going over the line?
Clara, you want to answer that?
I think when it's really obvious, you put Robert De Niro into your piece and he's in Raging Bull, it's going to be pretty obvious. I think it's a matter of manipulation. That's how I think about the reference photos. Like if we look at, this is a pastel drawing. Actually, Kat, you did this in my class. You actually went to the school cafeteria and took all these photos. And yes, you took the structure of the kitchen, but you totally changed the color scheme. I mean, the photo is so black and white and gray, and yours is super colorful. So I think what it comes down to for effective reference photos, if you are going to use someone else's image, you got to manipulate it so much that people can't see it. Because what I have seen sometimes, people will post something and then somebody else will say, oh, I saw that on Pinterest last week. Like, that's not good. Lauryn, have you ever seen that where you're like, oh, I know that photo?
Oh, yeah. There was actually a peer in my class in undergrad who made paintings that were directly ripped off of Tumblr art that I had favorited on Tumblr at one point. And in my head, it was like, woo, and people called him out for it in crit, and that piece is not shown anymore.
So this is actually a piece that I made that was referenced from an image that I did not take myself. I found it in a issue of National Geographic, and I took a picture of it because I felt inspired by it. But the reason why I use this in my piece without much worry is because I don't feel like somebody sitting in water is going to be like somebody can copyright that concept of someone sitting in the water. And I tried to change it up enough. Like the drawing that I have, the lady's not holding a baby, she's holding her own clothes. And she's also in a crowd of people. And also I made it so that it's sunset, a sunset that I took a photo of. And so it's really your own sense. Like, can you feel if something is totally ripped off of something else? Like, at what point is it okay to be inspired versus stealing something? And I would also suggest having other people look at your image and see if it seems too copied or not. But there is a fine line, and it's hard to balance on that sometimes, which is why you should take your own reference photos in the end. Just avoid that whole headache.
Right. I mean, I think that if you're concerned about it, just take your own. It's so easy. It's not difficult. And like we've said, a lot of these photos, you just had them, right, Lauryn? Like, you didn't say, oh, I need to take this photo for this painting. You just happen to have these photos around. And so you could mine from photos that were from a long time ago. Like, Kat, wasn't the photo of the window just some photo you had around?
Right. Providence has beautiful sunsets, by the way. Go to Providence for the sunsets. But yeah, it was beautiful. I just took a photo and I totally didn't think I would use it as reference later. But there we go.
And also, I think if you stylistically change it dramatically enough, like Lauryn here, the colors in the original photo, they're pretty drab. And also the cats are so specific and you can see the texture of the fur and stuff. But your final painting is not like that at all. And so I think if there's a real shift of style, that helps a lot. Is that something you're thinking about when you look at the photo?
Yeah, when I was doing this painting in particular, I had wanted to do my two cats circling each other. This is something that they do. I fortuitously found a photo of exactly that, way far up in my archive. And I knew that I wanted a specific framing within the composition, something really, really tight. So I just ended up drawing this image on the right over and over and over again until it was properly balanced in a way that could fit within the canvas and they could still look like they were circling each other. But it was a lot of work to get from that image down to this much more stylized image, even though it looks very impulsive the way it was painted.
But also you changed the composition so much. In the reference photo, the bed is very visible. The patterns on the bed are really prominent. There's a lamp in the left-hand corner. In your painting, you can hardly see any of the bed. So what I would just say, you guys, you want significant changes. The way I think about a reference photo, it's like the raw materials. You're not getting one of those pre-made cakes. You're actually getting the eggs and flour and making it from scratch.
Tammy asks a good question here. Do some artists own a specific style? When you admire an artist's style and want to emulate that style and learn it, how do you do this and not be a copycat? So when you're referencing an artist's work, and I do this all the time, Kat, what would you do to feel like you own a part of this, or it's your original work rather than a ripoff of another artist?
Right. I feel like that takes experience, because the more artwork you're going to make, of course, you're going to have phases. Like at one point, you're going to draw like Disney characters all the time. At another point, you're going to draw anime all the time or something like that. But I feel like once you get over that phase and start to really reinvent things, then that will start to become your style. Your style will be how you naturally draw in the end. And how you naturally draw is everything you've accumulated up till this point. But if you find yourself drawing something, you're like, I think that you could use this in Disney Studios, then maybe you should keep drawing and keep trying the different styles out there. Don't just be boxed into one style. And actually, we do have a live stream here on Art Prof about how to find your style. And we do address what do you do when you draw very similarly to another artist? Like, how do you work around that? So definitely give that a watch.
Yeah, I would say, Tammy, nobody owns a style, because there's a lot of artists out there whose styles are somewhat similar. I think it's just when you see it's like a really blatant ripoff where it's the same subject, same style, it's just regurgitated in a different way. I mean, it's case by case. I'd have to look at the images to be able to say so. But yeah, it's a good thing for you to bring up. Speaking of reference photos, there are sometimes things that are very hard to get images of. And so we have, for you guys, for free, you can download these high-res reference photo images off of our Flickr page. And I have shot these with the idea that they are meant for drawing, because not every single photo out there is good for drawing. And so what I tried to do with these is have them be very clean, really visible lighting and shadows. I know a lot of you guys are doing the 2500 challenge and you're all drawing 500 hands and stuff like that. By the way, if you use our reference photos and you like them, tag us on Instagram, art.prof, and use hashtag artprofshare so everybody can hear about our fabulous photo collection. Art Prof has a podcast. It's available on Spotify, also on iTunes. We'd love it if you guys would leave us a rating and a review. And please join us on the Discord. We will be over there in a few minutes, hanging out in the post live streams channel. Highly recommend you guys come hang out with us. The invite link is in the video description below. Please subscribe to our channel and join the Art Prof family. And thank you so much to our top Patreon supporters who keep us up and running. Thank you to everybody for all your comments, for participating in this discussion. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.